And so we begin another painting, 12 by 16. I finished a sketch. I lay the paper more or less down. This is actually a Arches 140-pound watercolor block. I've placed, while the paper was wet, this blue tape. It's painter's tape, so it's got low tack around the perimeter. Why I like this tape is that it preserves the edges around the painting so that when you go to frame it up, you don't have to have a double mat, and you've got this nice white to help pop the image off without having to have a liner, so it helps a little bit in that respect. At any rate, laying the first wash, using a big brush, coming back in, looking at the figure, looking at where some of the reflected lights are, warms, cools, kind of keeping my eye looking over the entire surface. I'm looking always, how can I make certain features pop out, recede, come forward. So I'm looking for some dimension within the medium and within the paper. So it becomes a little bit more not just seeing what's happening in the figure, but looking at the entire picture as a three-dimensional object, and how can I accentuate this figure and having it either pop out of the background, use of color, use of contrast. These are all tricks of the trade, if you will. Continue to apply details as we paint along. I'm watching the saturation of the water on the paper. I may have to jump to another area because, for example, in the face, if it's too wet, I have to wait till it sort of flashes. It's still slightly moist so that I don't end up with these hard, sharp edges. Certainly not at this part of the game. Really, at this initial stages, I'm merely looking at the figure, seeing where I've got really warm colors, cool colors, reflected light. Is there some green coming off of the dress? Is it coming up into the shadow part? Is the hand close to the face reflecting some warm color underneath the chin? So I'm looking for things like that. I think what art does for the viewer, it helps the viewer to see, and it's sort of, you could say that it's kind of the artist's job, is that we take away a lot of the extraneous stuff and let the viewer in on the secret. And the secret is looking at this piece of paper that's reflecting a human being and making it actually better than the image. And so we're looking for ways to accentuate, to bring out the character, the characteristics, the detail, the feeling, if you will, of the figure. Here I think the green dress is kind of a big element because it occupies a fair bit of the space. I'm also able to focus a little bit more on the details, the hands and the face, because the dress really is taking up a lot of the paper, and so I don't have to attach a lot of attention to that area, although I want to apply enough information so that the dress is clear and we can see some folds and we know more or less the characteristics of the dress. Here we're coming back into the shadow side of the hair. Initially I've just sort of dabbed it in there and just let it spider out. Now I'm kind of coming back in and getting some more details in it, some more dimension, if you will. Keeping edges still relatively soft at this point. Each time the model takes a break, which is between 20 to 25 minutes, I'll normally take the paper and I have a hair dryer close at hand, and I'll dry the paper off. Sometimes I'll come back in and I'll redraw the figure once I've started to lose the graphite, kind of washes off. There's an interesting thing about painting. There's a certain point that you know you've went too far, and there's also a point when you've got it. You know you're under control. You can kind of almost see what the end product is going to be, and so you just have to get out of your own way and apply paint in the way that your mind has already completed the painting. That's the trick. Can you see the shot before you take it? Can you visualize the end product and do whatever it takes to get to that end that you see in your mind? That's what we're talking about here. Still looking at the details, picking up some shadows. Here the dress is not just a green solid, but it's actually rather striped. So it's got some interesting characteristics, if you will. And so that's what I'm going to try to do here. I mean, the dress and the folds and the color do offer an interesting element to the painting. The painting, as you've noticed, is somewhat more into the green hues. Even the background is slightly more green, sort of taking the color character of the dress and applying it through the rest of the painting. Continue to apply details, looking for those details, being careful not to get too precise. A very great word of caution is if you are working on something and it looks good, stop. Don't go back. Be careful of the terrible temptation to overwork it. It's almost like something in the element of threes is a good idea. Light wash, medium wash, and then the accents or the dark. Once you start getting into high levels of multiple washes, not only can the piece start to get muddy, it starts to lose the real purity of the color that's underneath it, and it does get muddy, and then you sort of lost it. So I think there's you can call it is the art of knowing when to stop and not applying too much, and knowing just enough to, there's a hand, just enough, there's a shadow underneath her armpit, just enough, there's her portrait. And that's a good one to where we tend to screw up easily, is putting way too much detail in the portrait. Still coming back in with a pencil, kind of redrawing some of the pieces. Sometimes I start losing a little bit of where the lines are. It kind of helps me to keep control of that part of it. Now we're going to make that face in the background pop off a little bit. We're sort of losing it a little bit. Everything on the left side of her face and her arm are kind of the same color as the background, so we're throwing in some cool color to help push the background back, let the warmer shadow colors of her arm sort of bleed through, come forward. Always easier to add color or darken than it is to take it away, so you'll notice that it is a slow step process of going from light to dark. I always like to have some part of the painting unfinished. Here I've chosen to leave the area in front of the face in the upper left corner and also the lower right corner unfinished. I think it helps to preserve the freshness, the crispness of watercolor. We want to have that feeling of not overworked. I think that's part of the beauty of watercolors, is that it's more of a, you could say that it's more of a sketch medium, and therefore then let's leave the beauty of a sketch intact with the piece and let the viewer sort of complete the rest of it, which is always, I think, a lot more fun. It's almost like the unconscious brain of the viewer is having to interact more with the painting because they're having to finish it. We're going to leave just enough information so that they get pretty much the picture, and let their creativity, let their imagination complete the rest of it. It's like in some ways we capture them unconsciously by forcing their eye to engage in the piece. Perhaps it's something like, why do we like this person, or why do we like that person, or why do we like this painting versus this other one? Getting close, looking at some of the details, looking at some of the contrast. Do I need to put some color here to pop it out? I will say that after the piece was completed, I did have to take a razor, and along some edges, along the profile of the face, I had to kind of pop off, I scraped off, if you will, some of the pigment so that I could maintain some of the white of the paper, so that I increased the contrast between the background and the profile of the face. So you can take it off. There's the completed piece. We're going to have a little bit of a close-up here in a second. It's a little bit different lighting, so you're going to see the image being a lot warmer. This is just standard studio lighting. Thanks for watching.